Hello, individual and not necessarily better broad bands of pack animal pod people listening through that intermittently interfering internet. This is Material World. I'm Quentin Cooper, an actual person, not a piece of code, despite all appearances to the contrary. And bbc.co.uk/radio4 is where you'll find terms and conditions should you wish to look. On this podgram, originally transmitted on the 4th of the 2nd, 2010, we began with Copernicus, who said, "In the middle of everything is the sun." But, as we discovered, we're a long way from fully understanding our nearest star by far. And while we're figuring out how to increase our harvest of solar energy, could tiny bubbles be the key to getting better biofuels? Plus, we also talked to the digital revolutionary turned counter-revolutionary about why the internet may be stifling our individuality. First, the end of the Peers show. Well, not quite the end, but another significant attempt to undermine one of the main platforms of modern science, peer review, the process by which prior to publication work is supposedly subjected to independent, impartial scrutiny by others who are expert in the same field. In recent days, there have already been criticisms of how the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change sidestepped peer review in making some of its more alarming claims about vanishing glaciers, and how it took a full damaging decade for The Lancet to retract Andrew Wakefield's paper on the supposed risks with the MMR vaccine. And now it's emerged that a group of leading researchers into stem cells have also written an open letter expressing their concerns that peer review's being abused and used to control as well as to advance science. On a line from Canterbury is Tracy Brown from Sense About Science, which just a few months ago published one of the largest ever surveys of peer review. Tracy, can you just make sense of Sense About Science for those who've not run into it?
Hi, Quentin. Sense About Science equips the public to make sense of science stories and medical stories.
OK, well, help us make sense of peer review then. When it's working, what is it?
Well, it's, as you said, it's the process by which a team of researchers or a researcher finishes a stage of work and write a paper about presenting their methods, findings and conclusions, and they send that paper to a scientific journal that publishes research in their field for consideration. The editor of that journal then selects other people in the field, peers, usually people at some distance from the research that's been conducted, to review the paper and to identify any flaws in the methodology or whether the conclusions are not matched by the findings, and to give an opinion about whether that paper is suitable for publication, if it's original, make sure that it's not plagiarised, and to assess whether it's really something that will benefit other people working in the field to understand.
And this is a process through which hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of papers pass a year.
Well, there are about 21,000 journals worldwide that use the peer review system, and that results in about 1.3 million scholarly articles published a year, and of that I would say scientific and medical journals and technical journals are over 1 million.
OK, and so what are the strengths of the system as it stands?
Well, it's a huge, phenomenal global effort done for nothing by the scientific community. And the strength of the system is that if you think about how to assess whether a new idea or a new piece of research is something that would benefit the field, you can't really do that with a checkbox system. I mean, there's no computer program that you could write that would identify a great insight or a synthesis of all the research that's gone before. That does require human judgment. And the best and fairest way to achieve that is to ask other people in the field to make that assessment. I mean, I don't think I would be in a position to assess a physics paper, and I think we'd hope that people who are close to that kind of research would be the ones most likely to identify whether it's exciting or whether in fact it's been published before and that kind of thing.
But you've also given a hint in that answer as to where some of the flaws may lie. If people are close to that subject, they may be close to some of those individuals, and that there may be favour and there may be deliberate sabotage of their colleagues.
Well, like any system of human judgment, it has the flaws of human judgment, and of course, you know, there are times when jealousies and rivalries and those kinds of things come into play, and we've seen a bit of that discussion going on over the recent weeks in the newspapers about some of the material that's been published in climate research and also in stem cell biology. But the thing to bear in mind is, I mean, there are a number of checks in place. Good editors will be careful to select people who are removed from that. People are asked to declare any interest that they may have. For example, if they're seeking a grant for the same area of research, or, for example, if they have an interest. I mean, authors also, if they have an interest financially in the research.
But isn't that a bit like the bit on the passport form when you're going into the United States, where you're meant to declare whether you're a terrorist hell-bent on bringing down the administration? You'd have to be pretty dumb not to actually tick that box. There would be people, if you do have biases, you're going to say, no, I'm absolutely fine. I have nothing against this person who I've hated all my life.
It's possible. I'm sure there are cases. We can always point in any system that results in over 1 million publications. You'd expect there to be the occasional thing you could point to. However, I mean, bear in mind that people do know who else is working in the field, and most people want to contribute positively. I mean, in the research that we did last year that you alluded to, over 90% of people we asked about who'd had experience of reviewing, their main motivation was, I like playing my part as a member of the academic community. Most of the reason why people are in academic life is because they want to be part of their field, not because they want to be pursuing this kind of rampant individualism.
So any thoughts on why all these criticisms from different directions are emerging now? Is the process being more abused, or are the abuses being more exposed?
I think it's important to make a distinction between with the principle of peer review and the practice. The principle of peer review, I think sometimes we need to look at whether that's actually being delivered in practice. And we've seen a couple of examples where apparently the behaviour of individuals or groups in particular areas of research, and note that, I mean, if we're talking about stem cells and we're talking about climate research, these are highly fraught areas, very fast moving, quite competitive, with a lot of political implication. And in cases like that, it may be that editors need to have a bit more regard to whether the sum total of the individual decisions that are made in the case of each paper are adding up to a bias in the research.
And just while we are being critical, isn't there a possible wired-in element of steady as you go? You know, the research that goes along with or fine-tunes the kind of prevailing wisdom is likely to meet with approval, but something out of left field or paradigm flipping may be viewed as heresy.
I think you have to be careful about that, because most editors are pretty excited at the idea of publishing something that's a bit out of the ordinary as well. You know, it goes both ways. I think most big journals would love to be the ones to break some great new finding. And I'm reminded that, you know, of John Maddox, the late John Maddox's comments about the homeopathy paper that he famously looked at for Nature. He was desperate for it to be true, really, because if it was the most earth-shattering finding ever. And I was rather disappointed to find it was rather easily proved to not be true.
But just briefly, because you mentioned John Maddox, he was a journalist, he edited a journal, he put stuff in there sometimes which he knew wasn't necessarily the most scientifically accurate, but which he knew would get circulation. That's another factor in all this as well.
Well, a lot of journals also have an element of being a magazine. I mean, they carry peer-reviewed papers, and you have to be careful if you're a layperson looking in a scientific journal to make the distinction between the news and views and the comment section and the peer-reviewed papers.
We shall be. Tracy Brown, thanks. We'll have that interview peer-reviewed and we'll publish the results on our web pages, which are within bbc.co.uk/Radio4.